This morning in Sunday school, we took a look at 3 pictures of people going through water to see God's deliverance. And one of those is in the passage that we're looking at this morning, which is probably why we wound up there in Sunday school. But starting in chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians, Paul dealt with this now concerning issue that was really about food being offered to idols. And in chapters 8 and 9, he dealt with the reality that these gods that they worship weren't real, and that the meat was just meat. And for the most part, if they had no issue with that, then go ahead and eat the meat. But realize that for some of these people, that they couldn't separate the two with their practices of these worships, that now being away from them, eating the meat was a major issue. And Paul deals with this issue of freedoms, but also exercising our freedoms compassionately with those that we're around, and particularly the ones that we are close to and walking with. And he dealt with those differences between rights and how those are exercised for the common good, but also for our own conscience. For Paul, there were rights that he didn't exercise in order to reach others, and he also varied how he acted with people depending upon who he was with. And here in chapter 10, he's going to turn his focus not as much on the freedoms, but the guardrails that need to be in place because of temptations in our lives and how those impact us. And we're going to look at that as idol worshipers, the Corinthian believers were really no different than the Jews in the desert after being released from bondage in Egypt. They were being set free, that they immediately turned their hearts against God and began to worship idols. We know the story of Moses being up on the mountain, and what did they do? They convinced Aaron to cast this idol of gold, this calf, on which they began to, at least some of them began to worship. And even today we see that people are continuing to chase after things themselves. So this morning we're going to look at the first 14 verses of chapter 10, beginning with the first block in verses 1 through 6, where Paul points to 5 statements that were common to the ancestors of his Jewish readers. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that they might not desire evil as they did. The first 3 statements are found in verses 1 and 2. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers. This is for your knowledge. This is so that you just don't blindly think that you're different, you're unique, that people haven't dealt with this before, that it's not an ongoing issue with man, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So if we were to look at the story of Exodus, and I pulled out a few of them and a few more than we had downstairs because we're going a little bit further, but a few of those verses just to give us this picture of what they did. In Exodus chapter 13, verse 18, but God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. So they knew it wasn't going to be easy. They were equipped for battle. But God leads them. We read in the scriptures that he actually leads them to where they are. And where are they? They're right up against the sea. and looking for their next steps, the next place to go. And the logical question for those not familiar with this event is, how did God, who cannot be seen, lead a people on this physical journey? And that answer is for us in verses 21 and 22. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. It didn't depart from them up to this point. And even in the wilderness, God still continued to lead them and direct them in the same way, speaking through Moses, but visibly for the people to see, the large numbers of people to see that there was a cloud in the day and there was the fire by night, and that's how he was directing their physical steps. And leading in this way through Moses, he brings them to the edge of the Red Sea, which in Hebrew is Yam Suf, which literally means actually the Sea of Reeds, which has created some interesting discussions with archaeologists sometimes exactly where did they go to. But in most of our translations, we have the Red Sea. There God instructed Moses that he would harden Pharaoh's heart to pursue them in this place where they were really pinned with no way of escape. Then God would once again show not only his leading and his deliverance as he got them out of the bondage of Egypt to be on their way, but now at this place, but most importantly now, their salvation. As we read in Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, and Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you will only have to be silent." So here they are, they're pinned up against the sea. The Egyptian army is coming after them in mass with all of their weaponry and all of their other stuff, and they have no place to go. Nothing that they can do to be victorious in this. And God tells them through Moses 3 things. Fear not, stand firm, and watch. And see the deliverance, their salvation. And sure enough, at the right time, we have Exodus 14, 26 through 29. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared, as the Egyptians fled into it. And the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. All of the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right and on their left. In our passage in verse 1c through 2, we see that the people of Israel, they all passed through the sea. And in that sense, we have this picture of them being baptized into Moses in the cloud who went before them to bring them to that point, and through the sea that brought them out on the other side to life. This is so they're one of those pictures that we're going to see is fulfilled, and that's what Paul is going to bring them to in the person of Jesus Christ. The people were led to the edge where they had no answer of their own. They walked through the gap of the sea on dry ground to their salvation. They all passed through the sea, and in that moment, all of their doubts were turned to belief as God used Moses bringing them to the other side. In verse 3, we read that they all ate the same spiritual food. This is going to be now on the other side. Being in the wilderness on the other side, they needed to eat and drink. In slavery, it was there. They had it. They didn't worry about it. Sometimes might have been leaner than others, but it was there. But now they're out here and they've got nothing. They need to eat and drink in a place where these two were not apparent, the eating and the drinking. God provided both. First, their food. In Exodus chapter 16, the full pots of food while in slavery were looking pretty appealing, we read that God did something different. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Okay, God, now you bring us up to the sea. The army's coming on us. We have no escape. We're going to die right here. Okay, God brings them through the sea. Okay, now we're on the other side. We have absolutely nothing to eat. We're going to die right here. Kind of hard learning lesson, isn't it? Jumping down to verse 35. Am I on the right path? Yes. The people of Israel ate manna. No, let's say, so then I jumped ahead. There we go. We'll do 16, 4 and 5 first. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you." I mean, he parts the waters. And now what is God going to do? He's going to rain bread on them. It's not like, oh, we found this amazing field over here. It's ripe for the harvest. Let's just go eat it. Because that maybe they could explain because it's lush land or whatever it was. No, God rains bread down on them. "And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it'll be twice as much as they gather daily." And then verse 35, "The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years till they came to habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan." So the entire time there, as a generation passed, God provided that food for them every day. 6 days a week, gather on on the day before the Sabbath, the double portion, and then he's going to start it over again the beginning of the next week. So that was the food part of it. But they also whined about not having anything to drink. Verse 4 says, "They all drank the same spiritual drink." All the congregation of the people, spiritual, who does it come from? The bread obviously came from God. The drink that they were going to have is going to, again, be a provision of God. And all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock and thirst?" Brings them to the edge of the sea. The army's coming. "God, you brought us here just to kill us?" Brings us to the other side. There's no food. "God, you brought us here to starve us to death?" Brings us to the place where there's no water. "God, you brought us here. Now we're going to die of thirst, all of our animals and everything else." See the same pattern over and over again. And God already had an answer to their lack of faith. Continuing through verse 7 of Exodus 17. "So Moses cried to the Lord, 'What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock of Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water shall come out of it.'" So now if there was just some spring, and they happened on it, wow, this is enough water here, this is really cool, that's great circumstance. But no, this water has to come about in a way that they are not going to accidentally stumble across it. And he says, "Behold, staff with which you struck the Nile, behold, I will stand before you there on a rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." That's some massive water fountain, isn't it? And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord not among us? Noticing that the wording of this is not God's provision, God's refreshing, God's drink, but it's the focus on their grumbling and their persistent lack of faith. And then, continuing in our Corinthians passage, for they drank from the same spiritual rock that followed them. Isn't it cool that God brought the water for them out of a rock? Because he's painting a picture. They drank from the same spiritual. In most translations, that rock is capitalized, meaning it's not a rock out there in a field, but it's Jesus that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as an example for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. God provided for them over and over and over again. On the brink of total loss, God delivers them, and then they still return to this. They struggled with that. And man continues to struggle. I mean, we have battles that we fight in our lives in different ways to different degrees, don't we? And some of these things, maybe even repeatedly, the hard things that come to life, and we begin to question, we begin to panic, we begin to fear. I mean, this blow your family is dealing with yesterday, that's big, and you got to walk through that, and your emotions can go all over the place. All of us, as things are going on, we have to respond to them. And how are they going to respond? And for the people of Israel, it was to respond in panic, to respond with a lack of faith, a respond with all hope is lost kind of thing. And then what does God do? He shows up and he gives them that hope, that deliverance. Paul told them that the Lord who led them is their same Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He is the rock of their salvation. And God's deliverance of his people from bondage, preserving a remnant to enter into land, stands as a powerful picture of the deliverance given to them and to us in Jesus, the cross, the grave, and the empty tomb. The Corinthian church was comprised significantly of immature believers. Some who had matured enough to ask Paul for some help, and there were surely some who were not saved. The words were not written to the unbelievers or to the natural men, as Paul refers to them earlier in 1 Corinthians, but to the carnal ones, also referred to in the earlier chapter of 1 Corinthians, those who were saved, but they were still living according to their old ways of life, or carne, the flesh. To them he continues in verses 7 through 10. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. So we see multiple issues going on here. It's not just saying they did this and that's what happened. There were multiple things that were going on. And in each of those, their eyes were on this and not God. And so they were just totally missing that. They had the food, they had the drink, and yet they went out and did what they wanted to do. And immediately forgot who God was and what he had done. To these Corinthian believers, He had already told them that they had been made new in Christ. And in 1 Corinthians 3:16 we read, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Don't go worshiping in the temples of man-made gods of the world and chasing after the things of the world as they did, and as some of you are even doing now. There's freedom to eat the meat, as we saw in chapter 8. But as we see in this chapter, there's no freedom to partake in their worship, their sexual immorality, and so much more connected to who they once were and are no longer to be. Again, returning to the people of Israel in the wilderness while Moses was on the mountain of God in Exodus chapter 32. He's up there way too long, Okay, we're going to have to figure this out on our own. And they convince Aaron to make that idol of gold, the golden calf, and they join in that worship in Exodus 32, verse 6. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and burnt peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink, and what? Rose to play. A direct quote that we see of Paul in this. And as Moses came down from the mountain, as they saw that they had done, we read of him tossing the 10 Commandments to the ground and breaking them. And after some back and forth between God and Moses, we read in Exodus 32, verses 32 and 33, which is on that same slide. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Moses was the one that God chose to lead him out there, to give him this deliverance. And God had brought him to all these points of near destruction, and he had delivered them. God, and if now this is at this fourth place after the sea, after the food, after the lack of water, now to their turning on you and worshiping after idols. If you're going to blot them out now, just blot me out. Because all of this would have been a waste. And what does God say to Moses? Whoever has sinned against me, I'll blot out of my book. Then the Lord sent a plague in verse 35 on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. And then in Numbers 25:9, we get a commentary on actually how many people, as Paul quotes in Corinthians. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. Verses 9 and 10. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Paul warned them not to push the limits with God. He saved them at the expense of his son. No false god of man or idol made of gold can do that. Only Jesus. And don't put Jesus to the test. The cost will be great. It will be great in your life. You'll suffer the consequences, even as we read in Scriptures that God disciplines those whom he loved. We read even in eternity that the stuff that we do in this life will be measured, and some will go up in smoke, and some there will be reward. We read that some, even in Corinthians, will be saved as if by fire just because of their mere salvation and having not done well in following after him. The cost would be great. As believers, they would enter eternity maybe without regard. But for those who were playing religion with a foot in both camps, there was no end but destruction. The carnal or fleshly Christians were playing with danger, once again subjecting themselves to the destroyer, not giving the devil an opportunity into our lives. Again, verse 10 points them back to Moses and how Moses prepared the people for the Passover to be kept from the hands of destruction, as we read in 11:28 of Hebrews. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. It wasn't just that night, though. Even being delivered from Pharaoh and Egyptian slavery, they still turned their eyes away from God. They worshipped idols and they were destroyed, having been shown this great salvation. And for us to see even now this great salvation in Jesus, Paul is saying, don't do that. Don't go do the things that they were doing. Don't let the temptations around you in Corinth to them have a finger in your lives. Verses 11 and 12. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction. Notice those words, example. We can look to it and see. We can see what happened to a people when they doubted, and even how God delivered. We can see how a people without faith are lost and destroyed, but how others God brings through to the other side. And they were written down so that we would learn from them, and how we should really trust God now in all things, but also live for him in all things. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall, because surely these people, as they started off on the new day, they got up to play. They ate, they drank, and they went to play. They totally forgot about God in the rest of their lives. Maybe there were those who, in a particular area, they thought they could rein something in, maybe just this once and only so far. And it won't be that bad. I can walk away anytime I want. They might have been playing at the edges of their old ways and not mindful of what it meant to live according to who they were recreated to be in Christ. Paul told them to remember their ancestors. They were shown time and time again the powerful hand of God in their lives, and yet they gave in to their desires over and over, and for that, in a period of 40 years, a generation died. Paul wrote to the Roman believers in Romans 13:11, "Besides this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to wake up from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us now than we first believed." We don't know the number of our days. We just don't. There may be a tomorrow to correct what you do today. Paul says, wake up. Live today and every day for Christ and the power of the Spirit in us, who is able to deliver us from every temptation that we face. Apart from Christ, we're lost without any hope or ability to save ourselves. Jesus did what we could not do to save us and to give us life. For this, for us to think that being saved, we can take it from there, really sets us up for a fall. So, okay, God, thank you. I got it now. And what happens? Boom, trip, stumble. That's the summary message of verse 12, which leads us to verse 13, which is, in my own life, my own counseling studies and coming to terms with different passages, probably been right there at the top of the passages that I use the most in sitting down with people, and that's verse 13. And there's an insert in your bulletins. I'll talk about it. I've talked about it many times before. You've seen it if you've been around. But the verse itself says, "And no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation will also provide the way of escape," sorry, no period there, comma, which really isn't in the Greek either, "that you may be able to endure it." The context of this verse is clearly temptation. That's what we've been looking at, that the people see God's deliverance and they just get up and play. They go live their lives doing what they want to do as they want to do it. And the Corinthians have been struggling with the same things. And Paul says that is the context. That is, it is what is there. But this word is, and used in the Greek, is a bigger word than that. The Greek word parasmos is used 21 times, and it's translated variously in the New Testament, including here temptation. But it's also used as of a trial in which the faith is tested. Not that God is testing, but in the way of a trial which faith is testing. And it's not testing in the sense that God is tempting us, because James tells us in James 1:13, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one." That's just the truth. He'll go on in the next verses to say that the real spiral happens when we grab onto these things in our hearts and our minds, and we play with them, and then we act on them. And it leads to that destruction. But when something does come into our lives, which is often a trial of some form, how we respond. How are we going to respond? And he deals with that at the beginning of, James deals with the beginning of his letter in writing verses 2 through 4. "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith, produces endurance. Let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." We can see that same word, or variations of that word, throughout this verse in connection even to those trials and those testings. Here, for the Corinthians, the focus was on temptation and how to live as new when the old was thriving around them and they were even battling with it themselves. Paul wrote to them that there was nothing unique about them that may excuse their actions. Everyone struggles with temptation, maybe not in the same way or to the same degree, but we all struggle. That's the human battle of still being in a body of flesh with the Spirit of God dwelling in us and working all things new. And they needed to shift their focus from the size of the struggle to the power and the faithfulness of God in their struggle. I mean, for these Egyptians, they had some pretty massive walls they were up against that they had no answer for. For the Corinthians, they had some of those big walls, but most of it was just those things that they had practiced that they just need to move away from. But they knew that the temptations would come, and each of those temptations there was going to be one overriding supreme truth, and that was to trust that God is faithful. In the middle of that verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, if I get it back up there. There it is. In the middle of that verse, what do we see? Well, not really technically middle, but the hinge of it, God is faithful. God is faithful. And in his faithfulness, he will act to keep them and us in our struggles so that we don't need to have to listen and to lose those battles. And even when we do lose the battles, we know that we haven't lost the war. So on those inserts in your bulletins, this is kind of what I put together for myself, but then if it's helpful to others, there is no test, no trial, no temptation to sin, no pushing, pulling, prodding, or anything else that comes my way that makes me any different than anyone else. We all experience these things, maybe in different ways and at times to different degrees, but I am no different than anyone else, but God. Those are my favorite words, but God. He is always faithful in all things. With every trial, test, or temptation, no matter how big or how small, with all the things he has set a limit to them. He will not allow anything into my life beyond which he has also not given the ability to victoriously endure. That word endure for us is the hard word. With every single test, trial, and temptation, he has provided a way of escape, and he will keep me from being crushed, and he will bring me out standing on the other side. This is true whether that other side is realized in this life or ultimately in his presence. This is a certain fact. And therefore I'll place my trust in him and not look to the size of the situation, but the size and faithfulness of my God. The lesson that Paul was giving them from the Egyptians was they really became overcome by the size of the situation. They lost sight of the God who brought them to each of those places and was going to bring them to the other side. And that's what 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, is there is another side, and God will bring you there. And with that, we end in verse 14 with the huge therefore from Paul. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. Those things that are going to take our eyes off of God, those things that we just want to eat and drink and then get up and go play. Not that playing is bad, but the context of that was to do that without a thought or mind of God in our lives and how he would have us to live. And Paul's answer was just, get away from it. It's easier said than done, but that's still the answer. Flee from idolatry. And we'll pick up with that in a couple weeks and move through this. But that right in the middle of all of this is this statement that God is faithful, no matter what comes up in our lives. How big it is, how devastating it might seem, how much of a recurring battle it might be, God is faithful. And we need to make the choice whether we're going to trust him, move with him, The people moved from one side of the sea to the other. The people went out. They followed the cloud. They moved across the sea. They actually went out those 6 days and collected the manna. They drank from the water of the rock. And the rock is Jesus Christ, our living water. The one that he told the lady at the well that, I have water that you'll never thirst. And she says, I want that because I'm really getting tired of coming out to the well every day. But he says, no, I've got a living water. And this is this great picture in here that in all of this, for these Corinthian believers that were struggling so greatly, God is making you victorious because he is faithful. Father, I thank you for your faithfulness and for each of us as we go through our days with whatever mountains or maybe molehills are in front of us, whatever struggles or thoughts that we might have, that we might all take them really and submit them before you, knowing your incredible love for us, your infinite ability to deal with everything and to keep us firmly in your hands and to even deliver us to the other side. Father, I pray that we would all be strengthened and encouraged and we would be able to speak that hope into the lives of others. Even as Ian has mentioned, just the point of salvation for his grandfather, that as they're concerned about his physical life, to know, Father, that you are the one that can deliver even greater than that for all of eternity. And we pray for Frank, Father, for his salvation, as I know we have others in our own lives that we pray for, but also for our own standing. In Jesus' name, amen.